Greetings, one-lifers. Many Christians think that we can trust the Gospels, including the book of Luke, because they were based on detailed oral traditions that Christians passed on faithfully from one generation to the next. Well, this certainly happened, but actually our reasons for believing that the Gospels, and certainly the book of Luke, go all the way back to actually eyewitness testimony is even better than that. In the fantastic Oxford University Press book, Jesus and the Eyewitnesses, Richard Bauckham explains the differences between oral traditions, the kind of passing on of information to later generations, and oral history. Oral history is a phrase used to describe information collected while the people who experienced particular events were still alive, while those facts could be checked with the people who actually experienced the events in question. Well, most scholars believe that Luke was written in the first century, while many of the people who had experiences with Jesus were still alive to talk about it. For instance, another author named Papias mentions two of Jesus' disciples who were still alive during his day when he was writing toward the end of the first century and the beginning of the second century. Bauckham writes, "It is natural to suppose that those who were writing Gospels, our canonical Gospels, at the time of which Papias speaks, would have gone about their task similarly, as indeed the preface of Luke's Gospel confirms. For the purposes of recording gospel traditions in writing, evangelists, or the authors of the Gospels, would have either gone to eyewitnesses or to the most reliable sources who had direct personal links to the eyewitnesses. Collective tradition as such would not have been the preferred source." In other words, if Luke, let's say, were writing about Jesus' life during a period of time when those people who were involved in the events most important during the life of Jesus were still alive, he would have likely checked with those eyewitnesses. This is consistent with what Luke tells us he's doing. The opening words of the book are, "Since many have undertaken to compile an account of the things accomplished among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and servants of the word, it seemed fitting to me as well, having investigated everything carefully from the beginning, to write for you in orderly sequence, most excellent Theophilus, know the exact truth about the things you have been taught." Now, if you've ever written a research paper, you might think, well, why didn't Luke give us his sources then? Where are your footnotes, Luke? Well, Luke's writing style falls into a genre known as Greco-Roman biography, or at the very least, we can say that most scholars agree that Luke's writing has many similarities with that genre. And within that style, scholars think they've found a way that some authors cite their sources. They do it by using what has come to be known the inclusio, and that is naming characters in a story that you really didn't need to name for the sake of the story because they were your source. Bauckham writes, "A good example of this is Cleopas in Luke 24:18. The story does not require that he be named, and his companion remains anonymous. There seems no plausible reason for naming him other than to indicate that he was the source for this tradition." And last of all, even if we didn't have this great evidence, the biggest claim in Luke's gospel, or any of the Gospels, is the resurrection of Jesus. That's also recorded by Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, 3-7. And scholars think that that section is a creed of the early church that dates to within 5 years after Jesus' death by crucifixion. So do we have good reason to think that Luke did his homework and is a reliable source? Well, one, we have every reason to think Luke was writing an oral history that could be fact-checked during the lives of those involved in the events. Two, we have his explanation that he investigated everything and a plausible citation strategy that was used within the genre he was writing. And three, the biggest claim in his gospel is known to have been circulating within 5 years after the death of Jesus anyway. In other words, Luke's material is reliable and reasonably connects to the eyewitnesses of Jesus' life.